Welcome to the Wheel of Time Diaries. I'm your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and today is episode 47 of the series, the first one covering Winter's Heart, the 9th book of the series, and depending on who you ask, the second or third book in the purported slog that supposedly exists. So you see, my past experience with the series up to this point has been that there hasn't really been a slog so far. Books 7 and 8 have been notably weaker than the rest. Even book 6, to a degree, was a little bit bloated in my opinion. But those books were still really good, had a lot of great content, and generally still paced storylines in a way that I was broadly happy with. There are some things that I, had my critiques on, but if you wanted to hear any more details on that, I have Diaries, spoiler talks like this one on all of those books prior to this one. And I also have spoiler-free reviews on all of the books in the series thus far. So, how I ended Path of Daggers a few months back, the point that I made at the end of Path of Daggers was that I enjoyed the book enough that I actually wanted to get into Winter's Heart more or less immediately. That was how much I was into those storylines and how much I enjoyed the book as a whole. So, having now, a few months later, finally jumped into Winter's Heart in the heart of summertime where I live, how would I say things have been going? Well, that's a little bit debatable. First off, I did read the prologue in the first 6 chapters of the book. You probably saw that in the title and or thumbnail. So about 24% of the book I got read this week, and I plan to read up until chapter 15 for next week's diary. This week I spent about 7 hours reading, and the prologue by itself took about half that time. The prologue, I think, in this book is the longest one so far. And the whole beginning of the book as a whole has just been a little bit slower than I would have liked, even compared to Path of Daggers. Path of Daggers had a little bit of a slower pace, but actually, scratch that. Path of Daggers did not have a slow pace at all. I actually read that super quick, and it wasn't just how quick I read it. I just don't really remember there being any issues with the actual pacing of the storylines, except for where a couple of them were placed in relativity. Again, you can watch my reviews to hear a little bit more about what I thought on that front. This book continues right where the last one left off. The prologue actually has a few storylines, giving you a little bit of reminder of where those stories left off at the end of Path of Daggers, and giving hints of where those storylines are going to go. And then the first 6 chapters continue the Perrin Zareen timeline, or plotline rather, with that plotline specifically being the focus that I read this week. That's all I got through, is the prologue and those 6 chapters. Those 6 chapters had to do with that one singular plotline. So things aren't moving as quickly as I thought they would, unfortunately. The first 6 chapters of the book, the actual chapters 1 through 6, did not really have much of anything going on. There's a couple of things, but it's basically, as far as the development goes, where the storyline left off at the end of Path of Daggers versus where it's at now, you've taken like 2 steps forward. It's basically nothing at all, but we'll get into all of that in due time. I haven't disliked anything that I've read so far this week. The first, quarter of the book hasn't been bad. It's just been maybe the slowest bit of the series up to this point. Maybe that's because it's summertime and I'm not in a wintertime headspace, and that's kind of conflicting. Maybe it's just because I'm not as much in a reading mood at the moment. Maybe it's because the book itself is actually a little bit slower up to this point. Maybe it's a whole combination of those factors, and the fact that I'm just kind of really tired right now on account of what's been going on in my real life. Either way, the book's been fine. It's been thoroughly fine. I haven't disliked it so far, but it's also just been kind of whatever. Not much has happened. So I guess that's where I'll leave off on like my spoiler-free sort of first impressions for the book so far. It's okay, but we'll jump into a little bit more of the spoiler-filled stuff and actually talk about some of the things that happened. Now, first of all, we'll talk about the prologue. Like I said, the prologue took about half of my reading time for the week to actually get through, so it was a bit lengthy, and it had 4 main scenes of things that happened, and Robert Jordan continues the trend of having 1 or 2 scenes in his lengthy prologues that are really solid and like good prologue material, and then a couple other scenes that are like, this probably should have just been made into a chapter 1 and 2 or something like that, because it's not really prologue material. I mean, I get it, because even the main storylines that appear in these prologues are not part of the first major storyline that's covered. It's meant to be like a teaser or something. But even then, it's like, do we really need a 60-page in hardcover prologue where like 40 of those pages are the main storylines instead of normal prologue-like material? My gripes aside with the way that Robert Jordan tends to do prologues at this point, there were a couple of good happenings here. The first scene, especially of the prologue, was really solid. Really liked it. It was a scene of Taylene, the Aes Sedai, being mentally tortured by the sitters that are in the tower after they had at the end of Path of Daggers, or at some point in the Path of Daggers, there were a few of them who were, more or less had been tasked by Elaida or with each other to one degree or another to actually locate the Black Aja, figure out if it actually exists, and if it does, weed out who in the tower could possibly be Black Aja, because there's been, Elaida feels like she's being influenced by the Black Aja to some degree. Taylene is one of the sitters that was basically given an oath rod by some of the other sitters of various different Ajas in Path of Daggers to, forswear all oaths, and then retake the 3 oaths, basically. And she kind of refused to do that, so the sitters were able to presume that she's probably Black Aja, and it turns out she is. And this first scene in the prologue of Winter's Heart is them essentially torturing her to some degree to get her to actually come out with it, because they are, they're pretty set. They're determined to get her to say it because they're pretty confident that she is. She finally does confirm that she is Black Aja, and also believes that Elaida might be Black Aja. She doesn't know that Elaida is Black Aja, but the POV character here, I forget her name all of a sudden off the top of my head, but the POV character of this scene of the prologue is pretty doubtful that Elaida is Black Aja, because Elaida is the one that insinuated that she needed to weed out the Black Aja from the tower. Taylene does insist that Elaida is either Black Aja or somebody associated with her is Black Aja, because the Black Aja knows pretty much right off the bat every decision that Elaida makes, even before Elaida makes the decisions. So there's, the hints there that someone associated with Elaida very closely is Black Aja. Either she herself is, or the Keeper is. And as we know, the readers, the Keeper of the Chronicle is Black Aja. So that's the answer to that little mystery. But the 5 sitters that are down here with Taylene at the bottom of the tower doing this little session basically acknowledge that they are alone in their pursuit to weed out the Black Aja, because it'd be too hard to, you can't really trust anybody else. These ones all know, these 5 know that they're not Black Aja, and that they now have Black Aja, and they have to weed the rest out, and that's their goal. They can't trust anybody else inherently until they're able to, one by one, kind of get them to determine one way or the other whether they are. But it's a pretty dangerous path one way or the other. One of the other things that happened in Path of Daggers was we got some of the sitters of the Ajas who recognized and kind of caught some of the, I guess we'll say, the rebel Aes Sedai having infiltrated their numbers. There are some Aes Sedai within the White Tower that have infiltrated that are actually from Egwene's camp, that are from the rebel Aes Sedai camp, that were sent to kind of, sow disparity in the White Tower to kind of bring down the Red Aja for having dealt with false dragons and all of that kind of shady material. And some of those spies, like I said, were caught in Path of Daggers. Zira and some of the other spies are kind of brought up in this discussion in the prologue here as an option for the sitters to go to as potential allies, because those Aes Sedai would definitely not be Black Aja, and so are considering maybe going to them if they need to for, more numbers in doing this task. I would say that first scene of the prologue was probably the best scene of the prologue. The second best scene of the prologue was actually the third one, and this one is from some of the White Tower Aes Sedai who were sent to Andor to be undercover and to take down the Asha'man camp there. Obviously, we know the Black Tower has a lot of people. The White Tower severely underestimated how many they had there. They had only sent something like 50 sisters, if I could speak. Sometimes it's hard. down to the Black Tower to kind of take care of this potential threat brewing. But as we know in Path of Daggers, some of those people were basically caught immediately and have not able to commit that task, not least because a couple of those Aes Sedai were made warders, were bonded to some of the Ashaman. So that is something that happened in that book. But this third scene in the prologue does have Tovine and Gabriel from that White Tower group undercover in the Ashaman camp, because they weren't like explicit about what their intents down there were for obvious reasons, so that they can like get information about the Black Tower, still find a way to usurp the Ashaman one way or another if they still can. But there's also, you know, some other motivations going on there as well. The primary POV of this scene, Tovine wants to take Elaida down personally, like she wants to use the Black Tower to do that task to some degree if she can. But Gabriel reveals during this scene that Logain, who was part of the group of Ashaman that captured this group of Aes Sedai, he found basically the orders that had come straight from Elaida to say, you know, destroy the Ashaman, like make sure they're all dead, like hang them yourselves personally right there kind of thing, that kind of death on sight order. Logain had apparently found that order in the scene, but decided to burn it up and not say anything about it. So there's definitely some unclear questions as to why he would have done that and what his personal motivations are, what he might be considering to be, you know, why he would do this favor for the women. So there's some interesting, I guess, considerations for the future of the book here, and for the future of some of these characters as well. You know, there's a lot of plotting with Aes Sedai. It's pretty common with the Wheel of Time at this point, kind of is what it is, but this has been one of those interesting scenes that was like, I wonder how this is going to go, because now we have White Tower Aes Sedai in the Ashaman camp. How in the world is that going to go? We'll see, I guess. But those were the two scenes of the prologue that I felt like were prologue-worthy scenes and that I really enjoyed. The couple other scenes were also good for what they were, but they did deal a little bit more with primary plot lines. Scene 2 in the prologue deals with Elaine specifically. There are many political discussions occurring in the Caemlyn throne room in the second scene. Within it, you have Elaine and Birgitta and Dylan talking about the support of various different houses of Andor, turning some of the Andoran guard, the personal Queen's Guard, into an army of sorts to be able to commit to Caemlyn and Andor's future and to basically support Elaine's right, or her rightful claim to the throne is another thing that they're trying to work on and deal with the legitimacy of that. They're trying to legitimize her claim. There's a portion of the scene where some of the sea folk come in to insist on getting more learners of the source to kind of teach some of the sea folk how to actually use the power, which had apparently been agreed upon and not yet fulfilled. So those a couple people had barged in on this meeting with Elaine. Taim also barges in on this meeting on a late summons from Elaine as well to seemingly try to intimidate her to some degree. It's kind of unclear what his purpose was for actually coming here aside from the summons, but Elaine does stand her ground against him and basically tells them that they are in her country and they do kind of have to follow her orders. She has some stipulations for them continuing to exist to a degree, if you want to consider it that kind of a threat. It's not really a threat because they are kind of working for Rand, and Elaine does still care for Rand to a degree, obviously. She doesn't really respect the way that he handled letting her have the throne per se, but there is still kind of some political stuff going on there that she has to deal with. She obviously wants to be able to ensure that the Ashaman camp isn't getting unruly, that people are able to kind of like tour and explore that camp regularly, and she herself would like to be able to see it, so she has to make this little order to Taim in the meeting. There's also a portion in the meeting where a wise one just randomly barges in and summons Elaine in the midst of all of everything that's already happening to come to take care of a special Aiel ritual that she's going to be a part of, which is kind of mysterious at this point in the prologue. But, you know, as the scene continues on, we kind of understand what the purpose of it actually is. It's because Elaine and Avienda are attempting to become first sisters, and there is an Aiel ritual to do this, and this ritual actually occurs at the end of this scene. They undergo that process, they become first sisters. It was a really kind of strange scene, actually, but like also good. Like, it was really kind of strange in that way that a lot of Aiel custom just kind of seems to be strange. Maybe some of it was like, we didn't necessarily need all of this, but it was good to get that scene, that actual becoming first sisters with the two of them, and we kind of have a dynamic for their relationship together to continue the book with. I wonder how that actually affects like them as people through the series to come, and especially how that has to do with Rand. That's gonna end up being awkward at some point, I'm sure. But there's, you know, some interesting occurrences in the scene. I thought it was a good one. It was handled well. I thought it was well written, surprisingly enough, but it was also kind of strange. It came a little bit out of nowhere. It's like, okay, so that happened. The fourth and final scene of the prologue, however, is the one that deals with Rand. Of course, we remember from the end of The Path of Daggers where Rand ended up being betrayed and attacked by a number of the Ashman Chosen Ones, a couple of his people there, and you know, he basically barely managed to escape alive, but he did. This scene in the prologue here sees Rand giving orders to Doberine and Idrian back in Carrion regarding some of the rules for how to take care of Carrion while he is gone, while he is away. He also plans to take this time where he is away to actually chase after and untaint the male half of the power, the male half of the source, Sidin, at the academy in Camelin, the academy that what's her name, Idrian, actually runs. This is where they're at. There are also some folk working on building all sorts of different like mechanical machinery and stuff. There's some pretty good engineering things that are going on. It seems like they're also trying to build like a steam engine car of sorts, something that a vehicle that can run on its own rather than having to be drawn by horses. So there's certain engineering stuff that I'm thinking we're going to see development of in the rest of the series that might be used, that could be cool. Like, it'd be cool to include some of that material in here. This seems like a foreshadowing of that kind of thing. There's also another purpose of Rand being here, and that is because Min insists being with him, insists coming with him, and Min over here at the Academy is gathering up Haradfel's books. We remember Haradfel was killed back in... Was that Lord of Chaos when he was killed? Because he had discovered something that was really important that he needed to tell Rand, but the Dark One managed to get someone to assassinate him before that information could actually be revealed. So Min is now collecting up all of the man's books to see what it is that he was studying and what he discovered, and see if she can be any help. And then she's also, going with Rand wherever it is that he is going to untaint the source. It is revealed that Rand has kind of done the similar type of routine, telling people like who's ruling in any given city at any given point, and some of his rules and stipulations for running the city while he is away. He's done this at basically all the different places where he still has a heavy foothold, influence, or is technically the actual ruler of the place, essentially as a way to throw his enemies off of his trail so that they don't actually know where he is, where he was last, or where he could be going, so that he can go untaint the source. He seems to understand that actually untainting the source, if it is possible to do, if he's capable of doing it, would be something that would attract basically everybody who has the ability to channel directly at all. I don't even think it has to do with just people who can wield the male half of the source. I think it's just channeling in general would be able to tell immediately where he is at when he's doing this, so he wants to be able to get there in secret so that he can hopefully complete the task before anybody comes to stop him. But yeah, that's everything that goes on in the prologue. It was a good prologue. A couple of the scenes ran a little bit longer than I would have liked. The Elaine scene specifically just had too many instances of just like, oh, there's this, and then there's more people here, and then there's more people here. So that scene ended up being a little bit longer than I would have liked. That scene by itself was long enough to be an entire chapter, mind you. That's part of why I say, like, some of this stuff could have just been chapter 1, for example. The Elaine and Rand scenes could have been like chapter 1 after scenes 1 and 3 could have been a prologue. And then you have that little introduction there. And then we jump into chapters 1 through 6, except at that point they'd be 2 through 7. But It's all hypothetical, so it doesn't really matter that much, but it's just one of those things where it's like, I don't love the way that Robert Jordan has handled prologues. The way he did prologues in the first 3 books were great. Those 3 prologues were pretty short. They actually had like extraneous kind of POVs and stuff going on that's still related to the main story to some degree. And those scenes were interesting and good, and they weren't just collections of 15,000 different things going on, some of which are the main story and some of which are not, and some of which don't even really seem to apply to a degree, depending on how you look at it. It's just kind of messy. Either way, chapters 1 through 6 is where we jump into Perrin and Zareen's plotline. Now, if you know how I feel about these characters in the story at this point, it's kind of gotten a little complicated. I don't really like this plotline. I don't really like Zareen. I hate the way that she has affected Perrin and the writing of Perrin, and I don't think she's written particularly well. But in Path of Daggers, I didn't really mind them too much, surprisingly enough. I thought the storyline that had to deal with them, that had to do with them, that they were a part of, actually kind of worked, generally speaking. And Zareen's POVs, because this is when we actually have her having POV scenes, is in these couple of books. She's a little bit better in her own POV scenes. I still don't love her character at all. I still think she's maybe my active least favorite character in the series up to this point. But, you know, I haven't minded the plot line in Path of Daggers, at least. In Winter's Heart, to start off, it's a little bit meh. It's more meh anyway, just because it's slower. Like, not much has happened. So for reference, chapters 1 and 2 are Perrin POV, 3 and 4 are Zareen POV, and then 5 and 6 are back to Perrin POV. So chapter 1 sees, and all of this picks right up at the very end of Path of Daggers, basically. You know, you have this plotline ending. I don't remember where in Path of Daggers specifically it happens, but where the plotline ends in Path of Daggers is with Perrin getting an agreement from the Prophet, from, what's his name? Massima, the, you know, Prophet, supposedly, for the Dragon Reborn. He has agreed to actually come with Perrin to go meet with Rand, although he has refused to do so through a gateway, through anything that has to do with the One Power at all. So basically, the plan is for them to go all the way back to Carrion, or wherever they know Rand to be at the point when they're getting up to that point, so that they can actually meet with him. Perrin has just gotten that agreement as of the very end of the Path of Daggers. This book starts off right after that agreement as well. Perrin and his group leave the town, the city, whatever you want to call it, of Abila, following that agreement with Massima to come with them to meet Rand. On the way out, Balir, is that the, I believe, yes, Balir is the scout that is working with Perrin. He was the one that kind of helped Morghese and them escape from the Shan-Chan invasion. That, I believe that was in Crown of Swords, if I'm not mistaken. But, Balir mentions to Perrin on the way out, after kind of scouting around in the area where the Prophet has been at, he mentions that there's news of Shan-Chan destroying some Amadissian cities, or rather some Amadissian armies, and neutralizing nobles so that armies can't be made anymore. Amadissia is basically under the control of the Shan-Chan now, so that is news that has spread around that Balir mentions to Perrin. And his name isn't Balir. I had it misspelled the first time. I was going to say, I was like, that doesn't sound right. His name is Bauer. That's it. I just had a typo in my notes here. That's what happened. He also says that some of these attacks, some of this movement may be aided by White Cloaks, which is an interesting thing to note. He also informs Perrin of Shan-Chan losing a battle in Altara, forcing them back into Abu Dar, which is what actually happened at the end of Path of Daggers. So again, a kind of recap there of Path of Daggers ended with making an agreement with the Prophet, and then Rand having a battle with the Shan-Chan, and both sides losing, essentially, is what that battle amounted up to. And that information is conveyed here by Bauer. The word has gotten around, and he tells Perrin. That's basically all that Chapter 1 did. Chapter 2 doesn't really have much new information either, because if you also remember at the end of Path of Daggers, it wasn't just the Perrin POV, there was also the Zareen POV, and that saw her and various others get kidnapped by the group of Shido Aiel, and what's her name? Not Aliandra, obviously. Barrelay. of course, of all the people, Berylane was the one to not be captured in that ambush. All those people have been taken as Guy Shane by the Aiel. We'll talk about this a little bit in just a second. But Berylane is able to go back to the camp and inform that this kind of thing has happened. Chapter 2 sees Perrin return to his own camp and see that the Ghealdan people are Ghealdanin, however you want to pronounce that, Ghealdanin, are kind of at the throats of everybody else, because obviously Queen Elyandra of Ghealdan was one of the people that was captured by the Aiel. There are some Aiel that are part of Perrin's camp, even though they had nothing to do with this, obviously. There's just kind of a big tension back at the camps, where Perrin learns that Zareen and everybody else was kidnapped alongside, Morgase. Her name is Mygdin, but I'm going to probably continue to call her Morgase because she's Morgase. Perrin doesn't learn that Morgase was captured through anybody except for Linny, because Linny was still around. She's pretty upset with him, but he basically gives the command in the chapter for everybody to be ready to depart as soon as word of the kidnapped people arrive, because he's sent out pretty much immediately several scouts, various of the Aiel and Elias, some other people that are going out to search for Zareen and everybody else. That's basically all chapter 2 does. Perrin comes, gets the information, sends off the scouts, tells everybody to be ready to go. That's the summary of the chapter. Chapters 3 and 4 are where we jump to Zareen's POV, like I said before, where you have the group of them who have now been forcibly made into Guy Shane, even though Wetlanders traditionally aren't supposed to be taken as Guy Shane. So that's something that you should consider about how much the Shido really care about certain aspects of tradition, we'll say. But the others are being carried off to the primary Shido clan. They are being taken south along this way. This entire chapter is almost entirely just them walking and then being carried over to that group, where it turns out that there are like tens of thousands of the Shido altogether, and that they are all moving approximately south. Along the way, they are supposedly shamed by being clothed to keep them from freezing. So everybody is alive. That's the point of, I guess, that being mentioned, is that happens. But, a lot of this chapter is just kind of weird. It exists, but that's basically all the chapter does, is just those characters being carried off and taken to the main group. Chapter 4 sees Zareen and Morgase and Elyandra taken as actual Guy Shane directly under Savannah. So now we have Savannah part as the main plot line instead of just kind of a tertiary thing going on. They are all told that escape is all but impossible by another one of the wise ones, Tharava. Tharava doesn't like Savannah, obviously, which we kind of learned over the last couple books with some of those tertiary POV chapters. Tharava commands for all of the women, all of these Guy Shane, to spy for her, get information on Savannah, presumably so that she can usurp Savannah to some degree or another, and to not let Savannah capture them, obviously, because that would be really bad. We also see Galena, the Aes Sedai, who is made into Guy Shane here in the scene. Galena heals all of the women after they've been, brought to the main Aiel camp. We saw her at the start there. We also get to see her along part of the travels later in the chapter, telling the women that they need to bring her a chest from Tharava's tent for some reason in exchange for helping them escape, even though Galena has tried to escape a number of times and it has never been successful. So you have a few different things going on. They're all Guy Shane now for Savannah, so they have to follow her. Tharava tells them that they need to spy on Savannah for them, or she's not going to be friendly to them either. And then Galena, now as well as an Aes Sedai, is forcing them to do something against Tharava for her. We'll see how the chapters go, or how that plotline goes from here. I guess it'll be pretty interesting to find out, but those were effectively all that happened in those couple of chapters. Nothing happened, essentially. Chapters 5 to 6 return us to Perrin's POV. Perrin has searched in Chapter 5 the Wolf Dream pretty rapidly for Zareen, finding no sign, ultimately coming to an altercation with Hopper in the Wolf Dream, attempting to kill Hopper, even though that would be, permanent death in the Wolf Dream. or permanent death on his own side, but he's basically been like standing in the middle of the snow this entire time while he's in the wolf dream kind of searching for Zareen. He does not find her. He's mentally thrashed and exhausted. He's taken to Berelane's tent to recover. And that's where he wakes up in chapter 5, is in her tent where she tries to seduce him, but also says that, you know, a few thousand of Masuma's men, the one good bit of information she provides here is that a few thousand of Masuma's men have gathered a few miles away rather than the agreed upon 100 that Masuma had promised Perrin would be all of his honor guard. So that's something that Perrin has to deal with. And also, you know, the attempted approach of Berelane, which has apparently now been spread through the camp, which is like, can we like not have Berelane being a whore for once? Like, I'm just kind of sick of her character. It's just more annoying than anything. It doesn't feel like it's actually serving any purpose. She just kind of exists as a character, so it's like, whatever. Chapter 6 has Perrin confirming that Masuma's camp is just a few miles away because Berelane didn't actually say where they were at, just said that some of them had gathered. So he's able to get that information at the beginning of chapter 6. He makes to go meet with the prophet personally, but before he's able to head off, some of his scouts actually return with the clothing of Zareen and the others that were made Gaishain, which, you know, guarantees their safety. Some of the Aiel are able to express it's just like, hey, yeah, this means they were taking Gaishain, even though it's not custom for wetlanders to be made Gaishain. They're not going to be harmed because that's not how this works. Even if they're breaking custom making wetlanders Gaishain, there's little chance that they would go that far to usurp custom and tradition. So Perrin's more or less guaranteed the safety of Zareen and the others as well, assuming that they cooperate with them anyway. And they also learn that there are thousands of Shaido and miscellaneous others heading south, information that has come back from Elias and some of the other Aiel. You know, getting the approximate direction that whole Shaido clan is heading, and that the group with Zareen is presumably heading in a direction to meet with that very large group. Perrin announces that the party is going to go south now after them, and this is just the moment when Masuma himself actually arrives, rather than Perrin having to go meet with him. Masuma arrives personally at that moment and intends to actually join to chase after this group, despite them deciding to use the power to do so, because that would obviously cut down a lot of time and miles to have to travel. They're going to do that. Masuma agrees to come with them anyway. And it's like, okay, well, if you're going to agree to come with them at this point, but you're not going to agree to do that with Rand, like, what's the point? It feels like, I don't know, it just doesn't feel consistent for Robert Jordan to do that. It's just kind of dumb. It feels like he did that more for the plot than for Masuma's character motivation actually making sense there. It's just kind of whatever. You can maybe justify it to some degree by the fact that Perrin really doesn't trust Masuma. Anything that he has to say, he smells like a madman. He smells like a lunatic, obviously. So there's all that aspect going on. But that's basically everything that happened. Like I said, nothing really happened in the first 6 chapters. So I was able to kind of plow through those. The prologue has a good bit of stuff going on, but even a lot of that stuff is recap. Like basically everything in the first quarter of Winter's Heart is some manner of recap of what we kind of already knew from Path of Daggers, which was nice. Don't get me wrong, after a few months away, it was actually kind of nice to get a little bit of that recap, and then using that recap to sort of set up a little bit of the future, and then very minimal plot progression as far as Perrin and Zareen are concerned. Like, what's the difference between where it ended off in Path of Daggers and now? Well, end of Path of Daggers saw Zareen and co getting ambushed and captured, and Perrin making a deal with Masuma. Where are we now here? A quarter of the way through the book, and to be fair, prologue was like half of that length, but still, my point remains. In these first 6 chapters, what all did we get through? Let's see. Perrin and co haven't actually moved. They just learned about the capture of Zareen and co and where they're heading, and now are going to go that direction, and Masuma has finally actually joined them and are going to be there. Okay, cool. One step forward in that plot line. What's the other plot line? The prisoners got taken, the Gaishain, I guess, more appropriately, got taken to the main group. That's like all that happened. So as far as people, you know, complaining about nothing going on in the slog, I haven't seen that complaint up to this point, but the beginning of Winter's Heart is definitely the one where I'm like, okay, yeah, things are a little slow right now, not much happened. So I would like for a little bit more to happen over the coming weeks worth of reading. And like I said in the beginning of the video, the goal is to get to chapter 15. That'll be another about 24.5%, so I'll be right on the verge of halfway through by the end of the reading next week. So if you're going to be following along to any degree, that is where I will be. That is what I'll get done over the next week. But otherwise, that's going to be the end of this diary for Winter's Heart, the first episode of which, I would say maybe not my least favorite part of the series so far. It's just definitely the slowest section of the series so far. So hoping for things to speed up. I know a lot of people say a lot of great things about the end of Winter's Heart, so let's hope that things pick up a little bit. I think there's some pretty good hints and clues about how that could definitely be the case. But yeah, this beginning was not the quickest, I will say. But like I said, that will be the end of this diary. Thank you guys for watching. For now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys in the diary next week.